Hi, welcome to my channel. This is Katrina Sargent, owner and creator of Double Doll Custom Creations. Today we're going to be doing a fun Christmas chunky glitter ombre with a flood coat for my beginners tutorials for epoxy users. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. Like always, I will have everything linked in the description below, including my beginners tutorials on how to prep your tumbler properly and the very first video on how to epoxy over a single color base. I have already prepped and painted this tumbler white. I have pre-mixed a teeny tiny amount of epoxy in its own little medicine cup, have my glitter ready, and I'm going to warm up my tumbler. You can put this in front of a space heater if you would like, or you can just use your heat gun. You're basically just trying to get your tumbler nice and warm so the epoxy smooths on very thin. I use metal stir sticks always. It helps with the bubbles. So you're just going to want to put on a very, very thin coat of epoxy. This is the epoxy method on how to apply glitter. I am doing the entire tumbler in this white glitter, and then I will add my chunkies on when I get it on my turner. Once I've added a very thin coat, I just kind of run my hands both directions to make sure it is completely even and there are no streaks on the tumbler with my epoxy. When you're using this method to glitter, sometimes you will find wet looking spots on your glitter. This is why you need to glitter the entire tumbler multiple times. It just kind of prevents any epoxy from soaking into that glitter in spots if maybe it's a little too heavy or you haven't glittered it enough. But I usually glitter my entire tumbler about 4 times, meaning I use all of the glitter in my container, let it cascade off, tap off the extra glitter, put it in my container again, and do that about 4 times just to make sure everything is fully covered and you won't have any wet looking spots, because they will look different under epoxy than the rest of your tumbler. You need to let your epoxy dry. It depends if you used fast set or normal, how long that takes. And then once it's dry, I'm going to be epoxying the entire tumbler. I did 12.5 milliliters of each part A and part B. Over raw glitter, I normally stick to the amount of ounces to the amount of milliliters. So this is a 22 ounce fatty from the Stainless Steel Depot. I normally would have done 22 milliliters of epoxy over this raw glitter. I accidentally over poured a little bit, so I did more than I should have. And then I am going to take my finger and start removing some of the extra epoxy around the bottom. The reason why I'm doing this is because if you have too thick of epoxy layer when you're adding your chunkies, they will move and rotate as the tumbler turns. So you're basically wanting a super thin coat, kind of like you applied on your white glitter. I use my heat gun to smooth out the epoxy very little. The thing about white glitter is if you add too much heat, it can yellow. You need to invest in a good quality epoxy as well to stop that yellowing on your white glitter. I'm going to be adding my chunky glitter. This is from Mr. Naloa. So I start on the bottom and I'm trying to get the most coverage on that bottom edge. Then I will raise my glitter a little bit farther away from the tumbler, shake a little bit more gently as I go up the tumbler. When I'm starting to get a little bit too much cascading out, I will then tap on my glitter versus shaking my glitter. This will just help get a little bit more sparsely added. The further away you go from your tumbler also helps with having that cascading look. If you're getting way too much added from the jar itself, and kind of pinch and kind of sprinkle it on the tumbler by hand to kind of get a little bit more control of where that glitter is going as well. If you have any that has went way too far, just grab your stir stick and kind of tap them back down where they should belong. You can remove them at the time. And then take a piece of waxed paper and you're going to tap down your chunkies so they lay flat. This is going to help you in the long run when you're having to do multiple coats between sanding, so you don't sand off any color of your glitter. You can take your gloved finger and do the same thing. You're just trying to get it to lay flat. Allow that to turn for 4 hours before you do a flood coat. Some of you might not know what a flood coat is. What it is it is an epoxy coat over the existing epoxy before it is fully cured. This is so you do not have to sand between those two coats. You have to sand between each coat unless it's a flood coat and the previous epoxy layer hasn't fully cured. So I have let this turn for 4 hours and then I am adding a fairly thick 15 milliliters of part A and part B coat of epoxy over the entire tumbler, exactly how you would do any other coat. Follow your instructions on your epoxy for how long it needs to cure. If it can allow heat, I always use a heat gun after it has been turning about 15 minutes. And then 15 minutes after that, I use my torch to pop micro bubbles, but be careful, your epoxy might not be able to handle the heat like mine can. Over white glitter, be careful not to add too much heat. Again, so if you have a space heater in front of your tumblers, you do not want to add it with any white glitter. It will yellow faster, I promise. After it is cured, we are going to wet sand. I do not wet sand that very bottom edge because that is not covered in epoxy quite enough. I use 80 grit sandpaper or a medium grit sanding block. What wet sand means is you're doing your sanding at a sink with some water and some Dawn dish soap. This just helps any epoxy particles that result in the sanding. If you are allergic to epoxy, like I am, I have to wet sand. So you're just going to gently sand over your glitter. If your flood coat is too thin, you will need to sand very gently. If you fill any of your chunky glitter, do not sand that section, but sand the rest of the tumbler and do another coat. You're going to do a stainless steel rim because your epoxy has to attach to the stainless steel tumbler, not to the top where your lid goes. Once it is completely sanded and you've done your rim, you're going to wash it with Dawn dish soap and let it dry. Once it's dry, you're going to add another coat of epoxy. This can be a lot thinner coat, but make sure you get that bottom edge really well. When I let my finger rotate over that bottom edge, it helps the epoxy from pulling back up from that edge. When you sand between these two coats, only sand the chunky part or the section you're not going to put a clear water slide, because if you did, you would see the scratches under the clear water slide. My adorable decal, I got it on Design Bundles. I'll have it linked in the description, as well as my favorite water slide paper. I have just trimmed around my decal. I have a container of lukewarm water. These cotton gloves I got off of Amazon. When you're working with water slides, you need to make sure you have a little water on your tumbler before you add it. The water slide will release from the backing when it's ready. Don't force a water slide off the backing because you can ruin it. Once you put it on your tumbler, you're then going to take a coffee filter or a cotton glove, a cotton rag, and remove any water or air that could be trapped behind the water slide and the tumbler. WATERSLIDE paper is very delicate, so be gentle as you're working. Let this dry. I usually let mine dry for about 2 hours before moving on. I always seal mine with CCDIY Quick Coat because sometimes water slides expel the epoxy, which mine are laser printed, and I found that they expel it a little bit more than inkjet water slides because you have to seal your inkjet water slides before you use them. You don't have to seal your laser printed water slides, which this is. So this just stops from any fish eyes forming with my epoxy over my decal. And then I epoxy 10 milliliters each, so that is 20 milliliters on this 22-ounce fatty. I do 2 final coats. You need to sand between your coats, but be careful if you're sanding over your water slide if you have extremely thin coats. You don't want to sand off any ink off your water slide. I hope you liked this tutorial. I hope you learned something new. Please like, share, subscribe. It means the world to me. And if you have any questions or concerns or comments, please write them in the comments. I do write back. Hit that bell notification so you're notified every time I post a new video, which is every Wednesday, minus around the holidays. Thank you everyone for your continued support.